Have you ever considered making a podcast? Well, Spotify has a great platform that lets you make them very easily, distribute them everywhere. You can even earn money while doing so, and it's all in one place. And the best part, it's all for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and it's really simple to get started. So you record and edit your podcast right from your phone, your computer, whichever one that you like. And then when you publish them, they distribute your podcast directly to Spotify and also everywhere else that podcasts are heard. You can do video podcasts, you can interact with your audience with Q&As and polls. And once they're up and running, like I mentioned before, you can even earn money through your podcast in a variety of ways through things like ads and podcast subscriptions. And of course, it's totally free to use. There is no catch. When I started Plant School, I used Spotify for Podcasters, and I continue to use it because I love it. It's super easy to use, and it gives me everything that I need as a podcaster. So if you have ever wanted to start your own podcast, I highly recommend that you try out Spotify for Podcasters. You can download the app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel, and here we learn about plants, how to care for them, how they work, and I keep it simple and taught in a way that anyone from beginner to expert can enjoy. Join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to Plant School. Glad to have you here listening. Today, I believe, is episode 94. I mentioned this before, but on episode 100, we're going to be doing another giveaway. So we have a few weeks. But if you want to join in early for your chance to win a free plant and a free plant t-shirt from my merch store, go ahead and share this podcast with a friend, family member, whoever. I don't care, as long as it's another human being. And once you've done that, you can message me on Instagram at TinnyPlants and let me know that you've shared it and you'd like to enter the giveaway. And I'll say, sounds great, I've written down your name, and I will keep that list sacred and safe until the giveaway for episode 100, because I feel like it's a pretty big deal to be hitting 100 episodes. I'm impressed with myself that I've made it this far, and I'm just so happy that it's continued to stick around, and I'm so happy to have you as a listener, and this is like a small way to give back to you. So for episode 94, we are covering nerve plants, and this was something that I was not planning on doing, but I kind of just threw it in here because I actually had two people reach out to me within like the last 2 weeks asking for help with nerve plants and if I had an episode on it, and I realized that I had not. I felt like I had, because I think I mentioned them in my terrarium episode, but I definitely haven't done a full-on care guide for them. I'm looking up those messages right now just so I can see who is messaging me. Yay LA messaged me, and then there was also one more, Emily Smithmeyer. Thank you both so much for reaching out and just asking about this, because it definitely inspired this episode today, and I hope that this helps you with your nerve plants. So starting off, what is a nerve plant? The scientific genus name is Fittonia. There's quite a few species that fall under this nerve plant name, and we'll kind of talk about the most popular ones in a second. It's from the Acanthaceae family, and common names include nerve plant, mosaic plant, or painted net leaf plant. And they're an evergreen perennial. They're really pretty. So they have these delicately veined leaves, and the veins on these leaves, they can be red, some come in pink or white or kind of a different shade of green from the leaf. These plants can flower. They rarely will indoors, and they aren't really spectacular, but they'll be these white or reddish spike-like flowers. And like I mentioned, there's quite a few species that fall under the nerve plant name. So here are some examples of the most popular. There's Argyronura, Persei, Frankie, Fortissimo, and then there's one called Red Star. And those are some of the more popular ones that you might see. And this plant, you can even have it growing outside as a ground cover depending on what zone you live in, like plant hardiness zone. So if you're in zone 11 or higher, which is fairly warm climates. I would imagine somewhere like maybe Florida, maybe Southern California could support this. They can be used as ground cover in filtered sun locations. But as houseplants in their pots, they typically grow to a height of about 3 to 6 inches, not super tall, and they have these trailing spreads, and they can get about 12 to 18 inches long, depending. And just a fair warning as we get into this plant, they are known to be a bit temperamental and tricky to have as a houseplant. So this definitely isn't a houseplant that I would put on my beginner list, although they are very attractive plants and I think a great way to bring some color into your houseplant collection. It's just not the best beginner plant. And we'll get into why in the second part of this episode. But first, I want to cover where do they originate. They come mainly from Peru, but they are all throughout South American rainforests, kind of down on the bottom, underneath the canopy of the rainforest. And when it comes to what they symbolize, which I always love going into this, there unfortunately wasn't a lot with the nerve plant, but they can symbolize do not be nervous or you make me nervous. I'm imagining someone giving someone a nerve plant like before a big production or show saying don't be nervous. Or you could give it to your crush and let them know that, hey, you make me nervous. Or you could give it to your boss. Maybe they make you nervous. I'm trying to think of who I would give it to. Who makes me nervous? I don't know. There's a lot of people that sometimes make me nervous. Strangers make me nervous. Really pretty people make me nervous. I don't know. I would need quite a few nerve plants to be handing about if I was really into letting people know that they make me nervous via a plant, which I'm not going to do. That would probably be a little socially weird, so I'm not going to do that. Moving on, what is their history of becoming a houseplant? And like I mentioned before, they're native to the rainforest in South America, mainly Peru. And really interestingly, they have been used for years and years by people in its native growing habitat. There are some South American tribes, the Kofan, Siona, and the Sequoia tribes of the Ecuadorian Amazon, and they used fittonia albivenus as a treatment for headaches, for urinary pain, and for muscle pain. And in Chasuta, Peru, the plant is also used there, the same one, fittonia albivenus, and they use it as an antidiuretic for children. Antidiuretic relates to your urinary system and kind of slows down your peeing. If it was a diuretic, it would increase your peeing, but it's an antidiuretic for children. And they also use it for snake bite wounds. And there are some indigenous people of the Amazon basin jungle. They are called the Machiguenga people, and they use it as, or they used it as a hallucinogen. And they were said to produce visions of eyeballs. I don't know what that exactly means. Did they just see lots of eyeballs? I guess. If you're into that, maybe get yourself a fittonia albivenus and you can see some eyeballs. Maybe some optometrists would be really into that. I don't know. But they actually don't use it anymore for that. They have been introduced to other hallucinogenic plants, and so the fittonia albivenus has kind of fallen to the wayside for the Machiguenga people. Now, the leaves of the fittonia albivenus, they are still used in tea in northwestern parts of the Amazon region, and they also still use it as a treatment for toothache. When this genus was named, the Fittonia genus, they were named in honor of Elizabeth and Sarah May Fitton. And these girls, they're Irish sisters who were both interested in botany, which I think is so adorable. And they actually are most known for a book that they published together titled Conversations on Botany in 1817. I think Sarah May Fitton is the author of it, but Elizabeth is listed as like being a co-author because she heavily helped. And this book, Conversations in Botany, is the story kind of follows a boy and a mom, and they are having a conversation about botany and mostly the Linnaean system of naming plants. Apparently, it has been a pretty popular children's book back in the day, not so much now. I even looked it up to see if I could even buy it, but it's really expensive because it is so old, and not very many exist in the first place. I don't think it's in demand, first of all. And I even checked with my university. I mentioned to you guys I got a membership there because I keep wanting books that are really obscure for this podcast. I was like, oh, maybe this will be there. But it's actually a book that they will only show you in person. They will not let you check it out. And I think it's just because it's so old and they don't allow it to leave. So Henry Comans is the one who identified the genus Fittonia, and he named it after these sisters. So the sisters aren't the ones who found it. He was a Belgian Catholic priest and botanist, and I don't know, maybe it was unclear of why he named it after the sisters. Maybe because of their popularity, maybe he loved their book. And also maybe because it's rumored that the Fitton sisters are credited with bringing them to Europe in 1867. While I was doing research, there were just a lot of different conflicting things about this. Like Wikipedia said that these sisters were the ones who discovered the plant, but I could find that nowhere that confirmed that they were traveling around South America finding plants. It sounds like they were mostly just interested in botany and wrote that one book. And I found Henry Comans listed under the man who identified the genus. So there's a lot of ambiguity kind of around the Fitton sisters and how they fit in. That's ironic, how they fit into the naming of Fittonia. But if we do listen to the internet, sounds like they may have brought it over in 1867, introduced it into Europe, and because they are tropical plants, they do well, slightly, I told you it was a hard plant, they will mostly do well in our homes. And I think in like the 1970s, when most homes had really reliable heating and cooling and we could kind of keep a constant temperature, that's when houseplants started to really explode, and that would probably allow Fittonia to survive better and become more and more popular. But if you look it up, if you see a picture of it, you can see why people like it. It has beautiful foliage, and if you're confident in your plant caring skills, I say go for it because it is such a pretty plant. And with that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to go over everything that you would need to know for caring for this plant and keeping it alive and making it not so difficult. Oh my goodness, hello, it's me doing an ad for my own podcast. But I don't know if you guys know this, but this podcast, the Plant School podcast, is put on by me, myself, and I. No one is paying me to do this. I do it in my free time, and I greatly appreciate any support that you can give to keep this podcast going. So there are 3 ways that you can support this podcast. Number 1, you can share it with a friend. And if you do so, you actually enter into my giveaway. All you have to do is message me on Instagram at tinnyplants and let me know that you shared it, and I will enter you in to win some really cool Plant School merch for free. Secondly, you can buy Plant School merch all on your own. We have some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers, as well as Plant School podcast-specific shirts and stickers. The link to my merch store can be found in the show notes of every single episode. And third option that you can do to support this podcast is to become a supporter. There is a link at the very bottom of the details of every episode of my podcast, and you can click that link to support the podcast and set up a monthly donation. It can be as low as $1 a month, or it can be, as high as you want. I won't tell you what to do. Any support that you can give is greatly appreciated. It allows me to spend my free time researching for you and helping you learn more about the plant world in a really fun and digestible way. I love doing this podcast, and I would really love your guys' help in sustaining it so that I can keep going with it for the long haul. Thank you.
Brooks Running has a new shoe for you runners out there. Did you hear that? Better turn up your volume. In fact, turn it up to the max. Introducing the all-new Ghost Max. It's got all kinds of things to make your knees and ankles feel protected, like Max Cushion, Max Soft Landings with DNA Loft V2 foam, and Mac's smooth rides with their Glide Roll Rocker. Feel better on your run with Ghost Max. Learn more at brooksrunning.com.
And we are back, ready to talk about how to care for a fittonia plant or a nerve plant. So first question that I always like to cover is where to place your nerve plant in your home. What are its lighting needs? And anything else that we need to know about it when we're choosing where to put it. So they do best under warm conditions, away from drafts. Anywhere from 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 23 degrees Celsius is ideal. If they do have a draft coming in or cold temperatures kind of influencing it, it can actually start to drop its leaves spontaneously, which we do not want. And for this reason, they are actually a really good candidate for terrariums. I mentioned that I talked about it in my terrarium episode, which was episode 63, all about terrariums, and that was one of the candidates for being a plant in your terrarium because they really like that warm temperature. And they also do well with low light. They definitely aren't a plant that you want any direct sun with. I feel like most tropical plants, you can get away with that, like morning sun, things like that. It's not really going to affect them. But the nerve plant, direct sun can actually cause leaf burn or it to have dry, shriveling leaves. So a lot of people suggest putting it by a north-facing window so it can receive some bright and direct sun, but no harmful direct sunlight. Or you can simply just keep it in a spot away from any areas that do get direct sun. When it comes to watering your nerve plant, you want to water it when the top half inch has dried out. So it's not like the whole thing is super dry and there's just no moisture. You want just that top half inch about. And if you do forget, this plant will let you know. They're actually pretty dramatic in the way that they will just wilt suddenly due to underwatering, and you know that, oh my goodness, its soil has gotten too dry, and if you water it immediately, it will perk right back up. Very similar to a peace lily and how they behave. It's recommended to use lukewarm or room temperature water just because super cold water or hot water, I don't know why anyone would want to use hot water for a plant, but super cold water kind of makes sense to me. But it can shock the plant. So really anytime you're watering any houseplant, just shoot for room temperature water, lukewarm water. That's generally the temperature of the rain as it falls into these tropical forests that most houseplants are from, and so that's what we are mimicking in that temperature decision. You don't want to let your nerve plant just sit in water. You want them to have sufficient drainage because overwatering and sitting in old water can not only lead to root rot, but it can lead to yellowing leaves. They do like moisture, but just like not a soggy potting mix. If you are struggling with this, to remedy it, you just remove the yellowing leaves. Make sure you let the soil dry on top between waterings. If you really think root rot has taken a hold of your plant, you can actually take it out, brush away all the soil, and look at your roots. If any are mushy and black looking, you can cut those off. They have been infected. Healthy roots will be firm and they will usually be white once you've rubbed off all the dirt from them. And they do love humidity. Being natively found on that jungle floor, there's a lot of humidity down there. So it's recommended to set them either on a pebble tray where they can get that humidity, or you can put them near a humidifier. A lot of people recommend to spritz them with a spray bottle, but that is something I have never recommended because that will increase the humidity for a few seconds and then it's gone. So it's really not effective. Pebble trays or humidifier are definitely the way to go. And if you do have low humidity, nerve plants will show this in their leaf tips. They will turn brown and crispy, or again, you could get dry and shriveled up leaves completely. A lot of people like to put this houseplant in their shower. Maybe not in their shower, just in their bathroom. If you have a big shower, if you have a shelf in your shower, you could do that. But if it has good lighting, that's the biggest thing. If your shower has good lighting this plant can take advantage of, it can be a good bathroom plant. Next thing I want to talk about is soil for your nerve plant. They prefer a porous soil mixture that's well draining, has organic matter. Honestly, you could just use a standard indoor potting mix and it will be just fine. It doesn't need some crazy potting mixture or anything. And a lot of people recommend repotting them about every year in spring or early summer, or you can do it when you notice that roots are starting to grow out of the pot. But their roots are pretty shallow, so you can keep them in smaller pots. They don't need to be really deep pots or anything like that, because that'll just lead to a lot of just sitting wet soil. There's no roots in there to really soak up that moisture, so you can keep their pots pretty small. When it comes to fertilizing your nerve plant, you want to be feeding it every few weeks during active growing periods. Usually that happens from March through September. And when choosing a fertilizer, I recommend using a 5-5-5, 10-10-10, or a 20-20-20, and make sure you are following the directions found on that fertilizer bottle. And these numbers that I am saying, it's simply just the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium values, and it's the percentage of those found within the fertilizer of active ingredients. So for the 5-5-5, that means 5% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, and 5% potassium. But overall, this plant just wants a balanced fertilizer for it. It doesn't need anything that's super high in like phosphorus to help with flowering or anything like that. Just a balanced fertilizer works great. One of my favorite things to cover is how to propagate plants. And the nerve plant has a few ways. So you can use seeds, but they aren't as effective as other methods of propagation. So usually people will take stem cuttings, preferably in the spring or early summer when this plant is growing. And you simply want to take some clean, sharp shears or scissors and make at least a 2-inch cutting. And you want the stem tip. Nothing in the middle or things like that, only the tips of the stems. Try to include at least 2 nodes on the bottom of the cutting for the best results. Nodes are those areas where roots can start growing. Usually you can see them as like a bump along the stem. You can remove the leaves, but you want to at least keep 2. And you can place that cutting in water, or you can simply place it in soil. And if you do choose soil, keep it moist but not wet. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks for roots to appear, so you do have to be patient with it. But yeah, that's one way to do it. And then the last way that you can propagate a nerve plant is dividing the plant. In the spring is usually, again, the best time to do this. You can divide the root ball, so you'll take it out of its pot and quite literally pull this plant into 2 pieces or however many. You at least want them to be 2 inches in diameter if you do choose to divide this plant. And again, when you are putting it into the soil, keep the soil moist after you have divided it to avoid shock. And those are 3 ways that you can propagate your fittonia. When it comes to pests that the nerve plant deals with, they can sometimes get aphids, especially if they're outdoors. So for those of you keeping it as an indoor plant, not too much of an issue, but they can deal with fungus gnats and mealybugs. Fungus gnats are super common with plants that need a lot of moisture in their soil because fungus gnats thrive in wet soil. So you can kind of keep this from happening by putting rocks on top of your soil. You can use neem oil and treat them that way. You can actually pour diluted rubbing alcohol into your soil, and that will kill the eggs of the fungus gnat. You can set out little trays with soap in it and vinegar, and they will land in it. They'll be attracted to the smell of the vinegar, land in it, and die. There's lots of methods to get rid of fungus gnats. They're kind of annoying, but I think I would rather deal with them than any other pest. Because when it comes to something like mealybug, which is another one that fittonia can deal with, mealybug is just so annoying. They're like these little white masses that you can find on your plant. And you can treat them with neem oil. You can spray them off with water if you have like a sprayer. Or you can wipe them off if you have like a cotton swab with maybe some rubbing alcohol on it. But they can be difficult to get rid of because they love to hide in crevices and they're just really annoying. Whereas fungus gnats, you take away their habitat and then all of a sudden they just disappear. But it's hard to do that for a mealybug when its habitat is literally your plant, not the soil, it's the crevices of your plant. Last thing I want to cover is just some extra tips. So first extra tip is to prune it every now and then to keep the growth under control. They can actually get a little leggy looking if you don't prune it. And a lot of people recommend pinching off the tips of your plant, which we know you can propagate. And by doing that, the growth gets more full and bushy for your fittonia. And also, if you do happen to have your plant flower, which I mentioned is not very common, you want to pinch those off as well because it can really help keep that foliage full. Last little tip, more like a tip of knowledge. This plant is non-toxic for humans and for pets. I mentioned that one of the species has some fun medicinal uses and maybe hallucinogenic uses, but the ones found in your home, I don't think have those same properties, so please don't go eating them thinking that you are going to be seeing a lot of eyeballs and it's not toxic, because the species in your home is not the species that they were using over in South America. Just a word of caution. And with that, we are done. We have covered how to care for a nerve plant, where it came from, its history. Thank you so much for joining in for this episode of Plant School, and I hope to have you back here next week. Thank you for being here and listening today, and I hope you'll join me next week. If you'd like to support this podcast and keep it going, you can find the support link below in the description and donate. Or I have some awesome Plant School merch, including stickers, shirts, and mugs, and the link to my shop is in the description as well. And if you don't want to spend any money but still support the podcast, share this podcast with a friend, either verbally or electronically. This will even qualify you for my giveaway. Just message me on Instagram at TinnyPlant that you shared the podcast with a friend, and you'll be entered in for a chance to win some goodies. Winners will be announced on the podcast. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great week.